morning we have Roger Simon here with us from, tell me again, South Carolina.
Myrtle Beach, South Carolina.
Myrtle Beach, South Carolina.
Myrtle Beach, South Carolina.
Okay, great, but born and raised in this area. And we're going to interview him. He agreed to speak with us about his time in the military. So Roger, thank you so much for doing that.
Pleasure, Kurt.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I always just kind of like to get an idea of what a person was doing before they entered the military. Can you give us a little bit of background on that?
There wasn't too much. I'm a class of 47 out of Perham. I was born and raised over in Gorman Township and Hobart, and then into Perham, and left right out of high school. And part of my family had migrated out to Washington, D.C. area, and I migrated out and spent the better part of 3 years working in and around Washington, D.C. And then when the Korean War started, that was something that we all had to be confronted with, not surprising. And I had two older brothers that were both in World War II. Donald was a Seabee with the Marines, and my brother Harlan was a radioman. And when you're hearing the two of them talking about it, having gone through, I believe it was 2 invasions, my brother Don didn't think that was something for longevity's sake. So, and the other one was a radioman. And he said, as long as the ship is floating and you got hot meals and a clean rack, and that's the way to go. So when time came to go, I came back to Minneapolis and enlisted, and went on to Great Lakes, and that was the start of, 37 years in the Navy.
Now, you said 3 years in the D.C. area, just kind of odd, unrelated type jobs?
Yes. First one, in high school, I had worked for a grocery store in Perham, meat market for Welder Brothers. And I cut meat for 2.5 years in high school. So when I got out east, my first job made logical sense to me was to apply, and I did, to a meat market. Got the job, and on the second day there, the boss came in and said, with some expletives, "What do you think you're doing?" And anyhow, it was a union shop, and I was non-union, so we had an agreement. Either I would quit or he would fire me. So that was my first job. And it's got you adjusted. Went to work at a gas station, did that for a short time, and my brother and I, one of my brothers was already out there, and we bought a very modest little station, and I operated there until, so it was from 47 to 50. In October of 50, October 30th of 50, I flew back and enlisted and went out to Great Lakes from there.
Okay. And why did you want to enlist back in Minnesota?
Because both my brothers had enlisted there, and I thought that the family should all come out of the same state. So it was, and I took a gamble also. The price of the ticket flying back, I forget what it was, but both of my brothers had gotten a $300 veterans bonus when they got out, or whatever you call it. And I thought, well, maybe it'll happen again, and that'll take care of the plane ticket.
To get back to D.C.
Yeah, and it did. I thought 3 or 4 years afterwards, it picked up, I forget, I think it was $200 or something like that. That was it. So you got to look ahead.
An advanced planner, indeed.
There you go. That's it. That's it.
So when you flew back to enlist, were you inducted right away, or how did that work then?
Yes. I went into the office about the 25th, I think. Signed some papers, and then the bottom line, it was back on the 30th. Enlisted, got on the train to Milwaukee, and of course, that's Great Lakes is a suburb of that. And that was a 14-week basic training course. And that was, to me, it was a vacation. I mean, there was no time did you ever have to worry about either getting fired, getting promoted, or, and you didn't, all you had to do was do what you're told, and everything was just fine. And that fit me just it. So the ones that couldn't, I think the difference was I was then 21 and a half, and most of the youngsters were all 17, 18, and very few 19. Never been away from home. And I think that made a difference. But I really enjoyed it. Our first Christmas, the only Christmas there was, my job was in the scullery. And I was convinced that everybody had to be over 6 feet to work in the scullery just because of the size of the pots and pans, because everyone in there was at least my height, so to say. But, and even then, it was still a piece of cake as far as getting it done. And to get out of it, knowing that I wanted to be a radioman, and I knew that going in. And it was more toward I think it was the third week, third from the last week there. You got called in for an interview. The two old World War II chiefs were running the company, and one asked, "What do you want to be, Simon?" I said, "I'm going to be a radioman." He said, "No, you're not. You're going to be a corpsman." I said, "You didn't hear me." I said, "I'm going to be a radioman." He said, "You didn't hear me. You're going to be a corpsman." And I was dismissed. Okay. Second week from getting out of boot camp, and get called in, and of course he's going through lots of numbers and things. Asked the same question, and I gave him the same answer. He said, "No, you're going to be a corpsman." So 1 week before graduation, I get called in. He didn't ask. "I know, Simon, you want to be a radioman. You got the school." Then he explained that up till that week, the only school that any of the guys were being sent to was corpsman school. That was the big, Korea was going full blast, and they had orders, if you didn't become a corpsman, you go straight to sea as a seaman apprentice and work your way up from there. But with that, that got me my radioman start. I got into school and went on to a radioman school in Norfolk, and that was it was a 14-week school. This was basically to learn Morse code. That sounds like we're back in sailing days, but that's how the Navy long distance operated World War II and up to that. Morse code, you know, CW,
Oh, yeah.
I can still read it. But, yeah, anyhow. But I was a little dumb again, and it was a 14-week course, and they had a program, or as part of the system, if you got behind, got stuck, you started with a pencil, and work your way up, and you had to copy 22 words a minute to graduate. And I got up to 12, and I couldn't break out of 12. Well, they had this program, okay, if you're that far, not that far along, but depending how weak you were, they'd extend you 2 weeks. So it took me 16 weeks to get through a 14-week school, but I got through.
That's the main thing.
That was it, yeah. Then it was on to the first of 11 ships.
Just trying to, there's a lot of things I, want to go back and fill in, but I'm just going to let you keep going. You're doing a great job, and then I'll just go back and ask questions later. So, where to from there?
Well, my first ship was they call it an APD. It's all of that back then. Everything was World War II ships type stuff. It was like a destroyer escort the size. Had 178 men and 12 officers. Part of the amphibious Navy. We practiced, trained on amphibious landings up on the East Coast, and then first onto Mediterranean, and we did training with all of the European side of the Mediterranean countries, and that was tied into a lot of times, I say political, if there's local politics, or the local being, I'll say national politics. Case in point, Greece was near, and our first deployment was 1951. And Greece was in the throes of a try for a communist takeover. And so showing the fleet in close proximity, which is what we did then and we do today, and we've done it for the last 60 years. American Navy, I feel, is one of the force services. The Navy is used more in our foreign policy than the other services, because we can go any place in the world. We don't need permission as long as we stay 10 miles off. And when we go, we stay. When a carrier goes over, is out, and they're out all the time. You've got 80 to 90, sometimes 95 aircraft, bombers and fighters, and that makes quite an impression. And that has been used all the time I was in the Navy. And then the first time, back in '51, the amphibs, the idea of, in the amphibious group, they carried 2,200 Marines back then on 4 ships. And when you go through a practiced invasion with the local politicians watching and that kind of stuff, makes quite an impression. And that was part of it, or the biggest part. And the first, like I said, the first Mediterranean, I ended up 13 deployments later for trips to the Med, deployment into the Med, that type of thing. And we operated. Russia still was not up to speed as it was quickly becoming back then. They were not as necessarily a factor. But even then, we would operate Norwegian Sea, not too far north, but about just up about the circle, Arctic Circle. And you'd spend about 2 months up there, normally in the fall, and then back, that type of operations. And I was on that ship for 2.5 years. And I went aboard as a radioman apprentice right out of school, as I said, and I left 2.5 years later, and I was a radioman second class. That's a E5 is their pay grades. And I had no intentions of ever staying in the Navy. I was going in for 4 years, and that was going to be it. And I was not that happy. The crew of that first ship were about 75% Navy Reserve was called back from World War II for Korea. And they were not a happy bunch necessarily. So it just wasn't much fun, if you want to put it that way. But when I got ashore, I went ashore for Naval Air Station in Norfolk, and a whole different setup. All the officers were pilots. Half of the radiomen were flying radioman type of thing, and they had a whole different outlook on life. I mean, they worked hard, played hard, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it started to give me a different, hey, there's more to the Navy than just one side. But concurrent with that, I'd been there about a year, and my division officer come in one day when I was on watch and said, Simon, there's a new program that's been out 1 year that if the command recommends you, and recommend was, say, the key, a possibility to get into commission. But to get it, first off, your command had to recommend it and start it out, and you also had to have either 2 years of college or a GCT ARI, which is like a SAT type of a bit. And if that, and go in, and then you took a written exam, an all-day written exam, not a Navy one, but like you'd use it in schools. So I said, I'll give it a shot. And tried that, and we lucked out and got a commission. So from then it was up to Newport and Rhode Island, where we spent, we had, what we had, well, they started out with the program, there was a little over 2,100 guys applied for it. And after the tests, there was 1,900 that were sent up. And all the 1,900, 1,200 come out with a commission. So it was quite a screening process, or whatever you want to call it. And I went on to, my first ship was a minesweeper, which is just what the Navy applies. You sweep the mines before the heavies go in and that kind of stuff. And it was a brand new class. It had only been out about 2 years. But it had a lot of bubbles in it, a lot of things had to be corrected. But that made one deployment to the Med on that. It's a normal crossing is 10 days from East Coast to Gibraltar. We spent 22 days crossing, dead in the water, a lot, a bit. But it was, no, but broke down.
Yeah.
There was 4 of us together, so you had mutual support. But that was a baying experience on the first one. And that was followed by a mine hunter, which was brand new. When we put it in commission, built up in City Island, New York. Now that one didn't deploy. That trained and operated from Norfolk down to Key West in the Caribbean. That was our operation. I was exec on that one. It was that qualified me to go to school ashore. But I had not been in destroyers at that point, and I could look around. I had things against me. I did not at that time have a college degree. I didn't have any destroyer experience, and I was 5 years older than all of my officer equivalents, and none of that helps. So I asked for 2 more years at sea to get my destroyer time in, which I did, and then went ashore. After I had 2 destroyers, and then went ashore. And some of the, on the destroyers, I'll say some of the interesting parts where we're getting into the foreign policy bit. The ship I was on, along with 4 other destroyers, was operating, we're patrolling between the Yucatan and Cuba. This was after Castro came in and so forth. And we'd been down there for 2 months, and we're coming back, stopped at Gitmo, at Key West for fuel, and going up to our home base was Norfolk. And we're there for the weekend, and a lot of the guys, not unusual, called home and said, hey, we're coming up, we'll be there noon on 2 days after that from leaving Key West. And okay, we get underway on a Monday, and we were off of Key West, off of Jacksonville, Florida. And I happened to be on the bridge on the mid-watch. At 1 o'clock in the morning, we get a flash message for the whole, there's 4 of us. Turn around and go to Havana and take a position 10 miles off the coastal entrance to Havana and set up a patrol, a blockade, where intelligence tells us that Castro is going to be sending some ships out. We want to know when, want to know where, and so forth. So we did just that and so forth. Well, on the humor side, if you will, here's come 12 o'clock on 2 days later, and all our girlfriends and the wives and everybody else is down on the pier waiting to meet the ships, and they didn't get the word. Normally they do, what other commands are, and somebody didn't inform them. And that was 12 o'clock, and my wife said it was about 5 in the afternoon, and the shore patrol come by, what are you gals waiting for? Yeah, it ain't coming in. And that was it. So that was part of the family humor, if you will, with a little sickness. And a different, kind of the same scenario, but not the same end result. On the, well, maybe 6 months later, this time we were coming, we'd been down in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba for training. And coming back home to Norfolk, and again, we stopped for fuel at Key West. And we were there the weekend, and on Sunday night, about 1 o'clock in the morning, now just one ship, and we get another, it was a flash message, underway as soon as possible, and proceed, no speed restrictions to Cape Haitian, Haiti. And Castro again was positive data now that he was coming in with forces. Haiti has been a basket case for 200 years, and it hasn't changed. And I'd been there, what, a year before. But anyhow, so we get underway. It was underway by 2 in the morning. Get over there and again set up a patrol, and about a week or something like that, and nobody showed. I use him as an example of, again, how the Navy continually, and little things, and there's some bigger ones coming, that it's more our foreign policy, if you want to call it that.
It's a deterrent. It's
that's it.
A heavy persuader.
Yeah, it did, and then depending, how strong the force is and so forth. So after that, my next assignment was ashore in Washington, D.C., and just touch on 2, I'll say, incidents. It was assigned, there was a brand new organization established in March, went active in March of '61, same time as Kennedy was inaugurated, that type of thing. And this communication facility was a large war room with nothing but all of the long line communication systems that all the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines had. Long lines, just long lines, not tactical, not short. And when one of them, anything broke down, it flashed up on a map of the world, all electric map of the world. Today you would think that's a piece of cake. Back then it was unbelievable what it provided. And there was a lot of learning curves. But in any case, the difference there, all these circuits, all these long lines had been operating for years, but they didn't always connect to each other. There was very much, I'll say, jealousy between the service. I mean, the Navy lived on communications much more than the other services because of their mobility. much more. And we were very reluctant to say, now we got to share it with the Army or the Air Force. Army didn't need it except when they went into combat type of thing. So, but anyhow, it got put in operation.
Could you define long line?
Oh, okay. Specific, they come in from Washington. There would be a direct line from Washington to an Army base in Frankfurt, Germany. There would be a Navy lines from Washington to UK and United Kingdom. Now, there may or may not be a connection between the United Kingdom and Germany, quite often there was, but there was many cases of parallel systems. So one would fail, and whatever service had that system, they were just out of luck, and yet right alongside of it would be systems working just fine. And it was a political issue, fighting, but it survived, it's still operating today and so forth. But I was part of what they call a plank owner for something like that. It was a good experience, and it hit, I mean, what hit during that was the missile crisis. And that's the same vintage, but then, you know, at least up in DC, everybody was supposed to have 30 days worth of dry goods and everything else in the basement and all of that. And my wife and I did. I mean, that was the most of them did. But in any case, the center, I was what they call a watch officer. You rotated 8 hours on, 8 hours off, you know, that kind of stuff. And I happened to be on a day shift that time, and the boss came in and said, nobody's going home tonight. And you sit there, I mean, what else? I mean, we were aware of things going down. Well, the bottom line was, before the night, we were locked, could call home. They brought in bunks and that kind of stuff. And we stayed there 36 hours, my shift plus a shift that came in, and as they kept expanding. And during that time frame, America, we were moving stuff to Cuba, not to Cuba, to Florida and to Key West. They said, if much more goes down there, it's going to sink, because we were going to invade. There was no question. I mean, that was it. And we in our team, we had a civilian AT&T technicians, one of them that was very familiar with Havana. He knew where all the switches were and that kind of stuff. And his counterparts were down in Key West. Everything was ready to go. There was absolutely no question. Our job was to, every time if anything broke communication-wise, okay, how do you reroute, you know, that kind of stuff. And in retrospect, well, not just a little retrospect, but what was it, 8 o'clock that night, Adlai Stevenson was the ambassador to UN, and he come down and convinced JFK not to invade. So nothing happened. But knowing how close we were, and then to have it reinforced, if you will, when I left that job, I went back to sea as a staff, what they called a battle group staff, and one of the officers on the staff with me was a pilot, and he was on a carrier during the same time frame, and they were briefed. This was the targets. Everything was laid out. They turned in at midnight with a reveille call at 5 in the morning. Takeoff time was 6 in the morning, and they never got called. And that close to an invasion of Cuba. So again, and then my boss at that time, a 2-star, when he was just before that, he was a squadron commander of destroyers at sea when they did the interception of the Russian ships. And here we go with politics again. He was in command of 8 destroyers and had them all strung out a mile apart. And to get the word, identified the Russian ships coming in, and he gets a message from the White House. Please ensure that the destroyer Kennedy makes the first intercept. And the Kennedy was at the tail end of the line. Another ship was 100 and some miles at the other end of the line, and he had to pull the Kennedy from one end to the other to make sure that it made the. Then the job, there's where your politics. It's part of life, but it was I say at the time you might question it, but many instances, so many of my experiences are all tied in, were all tied into some little part of international or diplomacy, whatever you want to call it. But if I can put a little bit of a humor on the job at the Defense Communications Agency in the command center, you hear the phrase chain of command. One Sunday I was on the watch, and some disgruntled rancher out in Colorado or Montana, I don't know, someplace, blew up a microwave system. And okay, things like that were happening, but that was really good. It had wiped out an entire east-west link of communications, the whole thing. And well, we had a system in our center besides, what do you do when you get the information? We had some hot buttons. Anything on a major, it had to be big, but when you pressed one button, you were talking to the Pentagon War Room. And if it happened to be a CIA facility, we had another button, press them, and we'd tell them it just went down. Well, then they'd be saying, well, where? Well, we don't know. It's just down. Well, what happened? Well, we don't know. And then we'd get, well, why are you bothering me now if you can't tell me nothing? So I thought I got a little smart. If I waited no more than about 3 minutes to be right back quickly before I called in, and in about 3 minutes' time, I'd get feedback. Hey, it was such and such happened, or it happened here. So then when I'd call over, man, I was smart. They'd hit me with them, and I had the answers. And I'd been doing that for a number of months. And this Sunday afternoon on that loss, went down. And I had a log. When you called, when it came in, you logged it down. And I had to call my immediate boss, which happened to be a Navy commander. And he said, I'll be right down. What I was going to do was he came down. Well, then he called his boss, which was a Navy captain, who called his boss, which was a Army Brigadier General, who called his boss, who was a Air Force Lieutenant General, and then the boss of DCA was a Navy Rear Admiral, senior one. So that was the entire chain of command of the organizations. And one by one, they all showed up. And the first thing, everyone did the same thing, grabbed the book when I called, no question. Every single one checked the book and was happy. And the senior two-star, the headman come in, and he had already, his name was, first name was Bill, but his nickname behind his back was Sweet Old Bill, or abbreviated SOB. But anyhow, he looked at the book, and he turned to the two-star Air Force officer. Now, you got picture them all standing up on a big podium, and I'm behind the desk. I'm the guy that made a mistake if I made a mistake. No, he never looked at me. Turned to the two-star Air Force and said, why did Simon take that long? I think it was like 10 minutes. Why did it take him 10 minutes to make that call? Two-star took to the one-star, right on down. At that point, if you ever saw a chain of command in action, and you knew right where it was going. And
it's like dominoes.
Yeah, that's right. And I was on the receiving end. And so that's it. That's, say, a little bit of humor, but you got to get it once in a while. But that, so
in big trouble for it or anything?
Oh yeah, I got chewed out. Why in hell don't you know what the rules are? And I explained to them just what I told you. I said I really thought I was saving time because when I could go in, he never accepted that. No, I never got burned, but that was probably a part of bureaucracy, yes. Whatever it was. So, where do we go?
Well, you're just doing great. Is there more to keep on with, or?
Well, yeah. I mean, but remember, most people in the service, if you're 20 years, I just spent too damn much time in the Navy, that's somebody's going to say. I mean, there's always some of this going on. But yes, I think there's, you might find whatever. From out of that job, during those, on the staff, we spent better part of 3 months up north. Now we're getting further north. Now we're getting into the 1963, 60, from that on coming up. And we operated in the Med. We'd go over for we started, that cycle started in June of 63. And the flagship for that deployment that the Admiral and his immediate staff, myself, was on, was the nuclear cruiser Long Beach, our very first nuclear cruiser, first deployment for it and everything else. And we spent 6 months in the Med on it, and then it went back and they sent another cruiser over and the staff got extended so we could say we were gone for 9 months on that one, a little bit longer. When we get back to the States, then we were spending time up north, the Norwegian Sea, up far north of the circle, and Russia was coming in pretty heavy then with a lot of big stuff they'd never had before, and it was a case of cat and mouse. From then on, it was all cat and mouse with the Russians, no matter where. Russia kept an intelligence ship off the East Coast, about 20 miles off, late in the 50s, all of the 60s, and most of the 70s. It would rotate between Norfolk and Charleston, where our big bases were. So none of our ships ever got underway without the Russians knowing it, and we were tracked. I mean, that was virtual cat and mouse all the time.
So not interfering with each other, simply tracking and keeping
Both.
intelligence.
Oh no. One of their pet bits, tactics. When you refuel, you're really restricted in your mobility. You have an oiler, if that happens to be, we refuel from oilers or we replenishment food ships, et cetera, et cetera. And when you got a replenishment ship and you've got a ship on each side of it, you can turn course, but you're going to do it very, very, very gradually, where otherwise you could turn fast. Well, the Russians would, in the laws at sea, the ship on the right always has the right of way, no matter who you are. They would position themselves so they would be in the right of way up to a certain, be in the wrong deliberately, and then at the last minute would maneuver to put themselves in the favored position, causing us to have to do a radical change of course in our refueling and just begging for a collision. And that stuff does happen. So that was their, call it nickel and dime, but that's one you always had to be aware of. And that went on, well, as long as they had a deep water navy. But
was that something that the United States would have been doing back to them at all, that you know?
No, now some would say, no, and I've gone through a lot of it, I was never with any group that deliberately made any, we would stand if we were in the right, we'd stand our course. And then if there have been collisions, and then you got in the argument, well, who was right at the time, and if you had cameras or something, okay, you could win it. But it was always a threat and embarrassment or frustration. They did their best to intimidate constantly, especially when they got the new ships, the bigger ones and so forth, because they had some really, for a while, some really first-class ships that we didn't have to take second best to anybody. And that, on the staff job, that, like I said, that was 63 to 65, and then I was lucky enough, got to send me out to postgrad school, so I picked up a basic degree. From there, went back to destroyers and exec on a destroyer, again out of Norfolk. And the unique part of that one, a little bit different, as executive navigator, which you are on all destroyers, execs are navigators. North Atlantic Treaty Organization established a non-home ported squadron made up of, at that time, a destroyer from the United States, England, Holland, Germany, and Norway. Norway was with, and we were commissioned in January 15th of 1968. And in England, we spent 3 months working in the Hebrides, the North Atlantic up in there, which I don't recommend in the winter, but we spent 3 months there training with those forces. And then we started, as it's still going on today, that squadron, every 6 months a different ship comes in from each country. And spends 6 months and goes back. It doesn't have a home port. It's constantly underway. And that was a very, very unique, I thought, experience, both politically or in the politics of it. And you were working again with not just the 4 ships that in that squadron, but as you went from country to country in NATO, those ships would join on site, but never in their area, but didn't deploy. I found that very, very interesting, something like that.
Well, that's just a real key position
Yeah.
you've been in.
Again, you met so many interesting people in the Foreign Service. Not in a Foreign Service, I mean military, Navy service, but also through the embassy system and those guys. It was a constant education. There was no question about it. But we did that for 6 months, and then back a Caribbean operation, and then back to the Med, and that got into March of '69. And while in the Med on the 3 months, I was on a 6-month deployment, but 3 months into it, I got orders to fly to Korea for in-country assignment there, unaccompanied. So, but they gave me 20 days leave. So I flew back. At that point, I'd been home in a period of, a three-year period. If you add it all up, I was home 5 months. From there to Korea, in that type combination. But had 20 days. Then they flew to Korea, and I landed in there the day after the 121 got shot down. And of course, mine was a staff job, so I mean, things that were quiet and so forth. So when the 21 got shot down, they all went onto alert, and any guy that was transferring out got canceled. He had to stay, and more kept coming in. So it was a bunch of sardines packed in over there.
I'm a little puzzled. 1969, and yet this is Korea.
Oh yes.
And my history is maybe foggy. I would be thinking.
You're thinking
Vietnam was the
1950.
significant-
Yep, you're right. You're exactly right. Because of, well, I can't say because of what, but years before this, I was what they call a unrestricted line officer, in my case, ship driver, but I had a subspecialty, communications. It probably got started with my enlisted time, but I stay at sea. I never had a common job at sea, but when I went ashore, the 2 times I did, it was a communication job. So in Korea, it was again, a straight. I could have been a pilot, a submariner, or ship driver, but I had to have a subspecialty designator in communications, which I had. And I had requested Vietnam. I knew it was coming up, one of the two. And when I was on the destroyer, and I'd asked for a Vietnamese assignment, and I didn't get an answer for a while, and they came back. We can't send you there, but we need somebody with unrestricted subspecialty in Korea. And so that's how I got there. So yes, I enlisted in '50 for Korea, and I finally got there at '69. That doesn't make any sense, but okay, it's the military.
Yeah, I was going to say it does make sense, but yeah.
And while there again, on Saturdays, I met with students from the boys and girls, 2 universities there, as far as the USIA program, just volunteer. So they helped me. I never could learn Korean language, but my job was to help them. How do you run a meetings and offices and that kind of stuff in English? And so I learned an awful lot on Korean culture. But it had such tremendous respect for the Korean people, hard workers. The whole Orient that I met, I thought, the whole being Japan, Chinese, and Korean, they're just tremendous workers. And on the official side, 2 projects that fell in. I was deputy commander for communications for UNC 8th Army. My boss was a Army colonel, full colonel. But 2 of the jobs that was a challenge. The Koreans had full division in Vietnam, but they had to use American communications primarily to get down, and they wanted their own direct line. And America came up with I probably could say a piece of junk, but it was a used single sideband system, which is long-range communications. And then patching it up, and my job was to convince the Koreans to take it, and their job was to get me to convince to buy more equipment for it, one of those. It was a long drawn out, but again, dealing with English-speaking Korean military, part of the culture bit again, was a big thing. And the other one was there was a microwave communication system in Korea that ran, they called it a ridgeline, from the full length of Korea. We had one, and the Koreans had one. And again, they were never connected. And so when one went down, okay, I'd break up. And I was given a job, okay, negotiate with the Koreans, and let's get these 2 units side by side plugged together, but make damn sure that we control the interconnect.
Yeah.
So that's one of those, again, part of it. So that was my main bag, if you will, main thing for Korea. Coming back, and that was a year assignment. And when I didn't have orders on the 11th month, I called my friend, they call him the detailer, their bureau back in Washington, where you get your orders from. And I said, I think I'm here on 12 months and I normally would like to see some orders. Well, he said, you're going to the senior course of the War College, Navy War College, if you extend for 3 months. Well, they had you right there, so I just took 3 more months, and that was it. So when I left Korea, went to War College, and out of that, I went to night school. While I was going to the War College, there was a George Washington University on-site facility up at Newport, so I was able to pick up a master's while I was going to the day course. But anyhow, out of that, I got my first command, which was a frigate, like a destroyer. And the only, well, there's nothing equates to command at sea. I don't care. I can't imagine what it could be. It's just so unique.
It's your own little kingdom in a way.
It absolutely is, as long as you don't hit anybody or run aground. And that can really make a bad day at Black Rock, there's no question. But I flew down to Valparaiso, Chile to take command. The ship was just starting a circumnavigation of South America. And I flew down to take command right out of Valparaiso. We went down around. But maybe it's being the way come out is humorous. I had never worn glasses on the bridge of a ship. I only wore them reading. Well, I had spent most of my life always at sea up to that point, except for Korea and the War College. So now I'd had a little over 2 years of nothing but deep bit. Of course, I didn't realize the difference. So the first night out in fueling, and there's when you fuel at sea, American Navy, you come up behind your oiler and you come alongside type of thing. But down there we happen to be dealing with the Chilean, how they do business. And rather than what I say, the common sense, you start here and you go up to overtake it. They take the ships from up front, you come back this way, so now you're going double speed, coming at each other, and do a 180 turn, come alongside. It makes it a little more interesting and unnecessary and so forth. But okay, and I had one of my junior officers, one of the officers was conning, he totally qualified. And 2 of them, you have an officer driving and he's assistant, and then as a captain, you're any of these you're always there. And we're coming around, and I was satisfied he wasn't coming around fast enough to get without a collision. And I took command away from him, looked at you have a computer right in the dead center of the ship, and then you have it on each side. Now in the center, I looked at it and I can't see it. Absolutely, all I saw was a dull light. I could see nothing on it. And first thing I thought of, there's 3 little light bulbs in there. I said, damn it, there's at least 2 of them are burned out. Well, I couldn't see, and there was no question, you didn't have any time. And I turned to the young man that was on the helm that was steering. And I knew what the course was. I mean, I knew that coming in. And I said, give me 15 degrees rudder and call out every 5 degrees as we come around. So I could picture where that second was, and we just went alongside, and everything worked fine. And the next morning, or after the fact, I called up the chief engineer. I said, get that GD lights. I said, you can't even see it. Okay, and I said that night, and the next morning at breakfast, he said, Skipper, when's the last time you had your eyes checked? Well, I said, I don't need it. Well, he said, all bulbs are working. I put my glasses on and I could see everything, and I've worn them ever since. So you gotta, yeah, that was it.
Was the guy not coming around fast enough?
He wasn't.
Yeah,
he wasn't. But
there
would have been a collision.
Yeah.
Or at least
awful close.
Awfully close. It was too close to call.
Yeah.
And another, anytime, skipper mine, I complimented one time about an exceptional landing he made to the pier against a lot of current and wind and everything else. And I said, hey boss, that was a tremendous landing you did. He said, anytime I land them without collisions and crashes is a tremendous landing. And he had a sense, he was a tremendous ship handler, so he had a sense of humor. So anyhow, we did the South American swing, and we got back. If there's a nice time to come home after deployment, it's on the 20th of December. We've been gone a lot of Christmases, but we pulled back in there on the 20th of December, and it was a great homecoming. And the ship was then scheduled to go in about 2 months, was scheduled to go into a shipyard overhaul, and which meant I wouldn't be going to sea with it again. It was a very short Zumwalt was our chief of naval operations, and he came up with the brilliant idea that if he shortened the command tours from 24 months to 18, he could get more people qualified for it. The fact that you worked 20 years to get there didn't sit too good with a lot of us at the time, but you did it. Anyhow, so we got back on 20th of December, and there were 4 destroyers from Newport scheduled to go to just a short 2-month operation with the Spanish and Portuguese navies, with a carrier Intrepid. And well, I wasn't one of them. Well, about a month, and they were to leave in March, and about middle of February, one of the 4 destroyers broke down and couldn't make it. And I went down to the 2-star that ran all of the destroyers in the Atlantic and was based there. And they said, I'd like to volunteer to make that Mediterranean swing. He said, no, you just got back. I said, yeah, but I'm not advertising this on the ship. But I said, I want to go. And I explained why, the shortness, and I said, so. He said, no, you can't do it. Well, about 2 days later, he called on the phone, and he said, okay, Roger, you can go. So to this day, I've never told the crew, and I've gone to one reunion, and I'm going to another one here in October, and I'll tell them then. The morale was sky high. It was a fantastic crew. If you went out, I have said, if I could recruit twice in my commands, if I could go and recruit, I couldn't have got better crews than I had. They were just fantastic. So, okay, we take off, get over there. We worked 2 months with the Portuguese and the Spanish, and we pulled into Rota. We're all done. We're pulled into Rota for a 3-day weekend, and at Rota, Spain. And then we're coming home. And supposed to get underway Monday morning with the 4 coming back. And my XO and myself went over for dinner one evening, Sunday evening, and we come back and the ships are all anchored out, a carrier and the 4 destroyers. And I get back to what they call fleet landing, where you get on your boats to get out to the ship, that kind of stuff. And my chief was running that operation. Hey, Skipper, where in the hell have you been? The Admiral's been calling for you since about 8 o'clock tonight. He said, call him no matter what time I got back, call him as soon as I got back to the ship. Which I did, and now it was about midnight. And he said, I apologize. He said, don't worry about it. He said, how fast can you get underway? I said, I'm ready now. And he said, don't be so damn melodramatic. Can you get underway at first light? You're not going back to the States. You're going into the Mediterranean. Pick up and relieve another ship. And fine. So first light, we were moving out, and we went down from Lisbon down to Rota, and we met the ship, which was at that time operating as just a group flagship, the Little Rock, a cruiser, USS Little Rock. Here's your chain of reaction, how far in the world, how around the world it went. At that time, we had 1 all-gun cruiser, was a flagship in Norfolk. The Little Rock had 4 8-inch guns and 2 Talos missile launchers, but it was the next best thing. Vietnam was crying for gunfire support. To get the ship that was in Norfolk to Vietnam, they pulled the Little Rock from the Med there, and of all things, and by NATO laws, they say how many ships we had to be in there and their class. To this day, I never got an answer how they work that. But my ship was sent down to relieve the Little Rock so it could get underway, so that you move 3 ships, 1 destroyer and 2 cruisers, to solve a problem, not solve it, help a problem in Vietnam. Again, the Navy with its mobility can respond so uniquely that the other services can't. It's just our design. So, and what I had no knowledge, didn't even dreamed of, 9 months later, I volunteered for it, to be exec on the Little Rock, as it was being set up to be a Mediterranean flagship going back. Of course, I never knew that at the time. And we went into the Med, and we were chasing, Russians had 4 submarines in there at that time, and we're just monitoring. We had an excellent sonar system. And my class of ship, it was a single screw, which is what you don't want, but that's what they gave me. But it had an excellent sonar system, and we was always tracking the Russians, where they were, monitoring Gibraltar. When they came through, they have to come through on the surface, the Russian by law. So and then you'd catch them there and so forth. And that went on for, like I say, about 6 weeks. And one during the middle of an anti-submarine warfare operation. And my engineering plant was unique on my ship. We only had 14 of those types, and it had a flaw in design, but it was scheduled to be corrected as soon as we went in the yard when we got back. Well, the flaw came quick than expected, and I lost turbine blades. And when you have a single screw ship and the screw don't turn, you really can't make much headway. So we got towed into
Bring out the oars.
That's it. And try it. So it got towed into Naples, and but again, the crew repaired. The chain of command said they'd have to send over experts from Philadelphia because of our unique engine. And my chief engineer, the same one that I had climbed on the light-in bit, said, we can do it. And the civilian team from Philadelphia, head man came over and said, we can have it running in 10 days, as soon as my team gets here. My chief engineer and his gang, he said, if I can have all the help, no matter what the rates are, tearing things apart, putting it all together, we can do it. 4 days later, we were operating that bit. So it shows the quality that you had to work with. So, and that got us back, and that was the end of that assignment. And when I got relieved in the shipyard, just as expected, but about 2 weeks before I got in fact, I already had orders to Washington. And I had met the commanding officer of the Little Rock casually. And he was well, I'd say a low-keyed, but he was still a senior captain. Personality-wise, it was interesting, but one night we had a social dinner together. The only time we really sat down and talked. And didn't think anything about it. And next morning I get a call from my detailer in Washington. He said, do you know Captain so-and-so? I said, well, yeah, I met him last night really for a conversation. He said he wants you for his exec. He's firing his, he didn't say the firing, he said he wants you, his exec is leaving, and he wants you for his exec. Well, by that time, my seat time had gotten longer and longer and longer, and there was some family things getting questioning. So we took a vote in the family and said, okay, knowing that we're headed to Europe for 2 years. I hung up from him, and I get a phone call from the captain saying, come on over, a cup of coffee. And I walked over, and he had no sense of humor. He just batted an eye. He said, I'm firing my exec. I'd like to have you for the job. Well, on the bottom line, I took it. And normally, career-wise, at that time, that was not a career-enhancing, it was one of those jobs that are questionable. But I'd been on a rock before in a staff job. So I was going back to a ship I knew physically all about. So then we left for the Med, and one of the main, there were two big interesting events, if you will. We got over we went over in September of 73, and the first, but we were there about 3 weeks in port, and we went out for an operation, and we pulled into Istanbul, Turkey for 10-day, not 10-day, but 5-day port. That happened to be October 6th of 73, when Egypt and Syria decided to attack Israel. And we got ordered out of there ASAP, and were set out and set up into a location by Cyprus, just off of Cyprus. And not till after the fact did, at least myself, but how many ships were there. Up until 66, Russia only had 12 ships in the Mediterranean. 1 year later, they had 30, and in 73, they had 57. And all new, all first class and so forth. And we get out there, we had two battle groups, two carrier battle groups in the Med, one amphibious group in the Med. We had, I had to jot that one down, what was it? Yeah, we had 48 ships and they had 57. And in the next 10 days, 12 days, those numbers increased. They had 95 and we had 60 ships in there. And Russia's boss, can't think of his name now, Khrushchev. No, not Khrushchev, no. Brezhnev, well, don't make any difference. Headman said, either Israel not stop or Russia would intervene and stop it. And he gave orders to land, they had a lot of Marines, the Russians did, to land a Marine force on the eastern side of the Suez. Israel had encircled the entire Egyptian Third Army, and they would be wiped out. And we pressured Israel not to continue the attack, and then Russia eased off. But by that time, with all of these ships, they had us outnumbered by numbers, they had us outnumbered by missiles. At that time, they had 13 surface missiles aimed at each of our 3 battle groups. We couldn't match it. Admiral Moore was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff back then, and at a staff meeting, he told the board members, this is a quote, "If Russia attacks us in the Eastern Med, we will," if I could quote him, "lose our ass." And that was the senior man in the Navy. Because we didn't know on board, we were aware of that being a flagship. And we had a 3-star. He was the boss in the Med. And we had been drilling holes in the water for about 4 days. And he had already, not going anyplace. Not going, killing time. We couldn't leave, carriers couldn't leave. They were all sitting ducks, but we wanted, the big bosses wanted to keep the power at one spot. We didn't have the firepower the Russians did, which was unique at that time. But they said if standing orders were something to the effect, our one job just as a ship, not the flagship, was to go into Cyprus and evacuate a group of key British people that were there. And we've been, like I said, maybe 2 days, not quite 3 days, we've been going no place, but staying right where the boss said. A number of ships and how close that was to a major international incident did not become obvious until the historians got involved with and so forth, and that's where we got some of my data from. I remember from being in the ship and what we did and what orders went out and so forth. But in any case, the Admiral Daniel Murphy was a 3-star running the fleet, and he apparently had decided on his own that, hey, after 3 days, if we're going in and evacuate, we're going to do it. But his boss was a 4-star in London. That's how the chain of command went, to London and then back to the States. And so it was about 11:30, 12 o'clock at night, and I went, they call flag plot in a flagship. It's where all your staff operational working, they're the ones maneuvering all the ships and all of that, communications with the whole world and so forth. And so just before midnight, I went up at the flag plot, just being nosy. I could get in there, but not everybody could get in, but the XOs could. But anyhow, went up and I'm hearing this booming voice, one of the loudspeakers. The Admiral 4-star in London, he was just a little guy, I got to know him later. He had a baritone voice. I mean, he could make a snake stand up on attention, I think, just with his voice. And I walk through the door and I hear him, "Turn that GD ship around and get back where you were told to stay." And you could have heard a pin drop in combat. I mean, okay, that was one 4-star talking to one 3-star. And we went back and continued to drill holes in the water until it subsided. But I read an article a couple weeks ago that at the time, by 2020 hindsight, they considered this was the greatest threat of a major maritime operation with the Russians since World War II. If the Russians would have, they had the ships, they had the weapons to wipe us, or at least do a terrible, depending on who shot first. Yeah, who shot first. Then, if we shot first, then we would have had it. Or if he would have landed Marines in the Sinai, that would have been another one. And if they would have taken out another Russian or Israeli ship, because the Israelis had sunk 2 Russian ships. Why they never got shot back, I don't know, but that's part of it. So that was it, and kind of uniquely enough, that was October, November of '63, and in about 73, correction. And I believe, I know that date, and I think it was probably in April, May or April, of '74, the Little Rock ship I'm on, flagship, is ordered into Alexandria, Egypt. First time an American ship had been in Egypt for 18 years under Colonel Nasser. It was a toy of Russia, and we pulled in there. It was not made public until we got there. Normally they always announce before we pull into a ship, and that was kept undercover until we had pulled in one day later. Then it was made public, so forth. And you found the Egyptians, not a question. You didn't see a protester. You didn't see nothing. They were just, they couldn't have been nice. And that's after 20 years, or 18 years, I think it was, under Russian total domination. So I thought that was an experience, something like that.
Yes.
Left there and was sent or ordered to take command of a Navy had a communication station in Morocco. And by this time, the gentleman that was my detailer was the guy that had been my hiring CO. So it was a kind of a personal thing. I don't know how you'd explain it, but anyhow. We went there for 2 years and found the Moroccan people just very, very great folks. Again, hard workers. It's a culture country, just like you got in Iraq. There are 3 tribes in Morocco, up in the mountains, on the seacoast, and on the desert. They're a tribe first, and they are a nation second. Sounds familiar, but considerably much more westernized, but still a very, very strong dictatorship, but much better than his father was. They had they call it a Green March, something like, I don't know, several thousand of one of the classes were protesting, but no violence. They just marched. And they marched, had nothing to do with the base, but to get from point A to point B, where they started to get to the capital, they had to march right by our base. So we watched for a better part of a day, one stream of marches going by the bit. And interfaced there again, interfaced with the local government. There was a very small town, about 4 miles from the base, so you interface constantly with the police, with the mayor, the governor of the province, on politics, or what do you want to call it. The very first meeting I had with the governor of the province, this would be 75. And he was French educated, spoke perfect English and so forth. And first or second question he asked, what do you call the 1963 Israel, the war? I said, yeah, no, my mind just went blank.
You talking about Korea?
No, 67, 1967.
Oh, 67.
Hanukkah in this country. You hear it called a Hanukkah war. Very, very privileged to hear that, at least I have it, so forth. And that's what I told the governor. I said, Hanukkah. And he said, well, why? I said, because it happened during the Jewish holidays. Well, why didn't you call it the Ramadan War? It happened during the Muslim high holidays. That showed my ignorance in local culture, but another lesson I learned. And he was a very, very nice gentleman. We had many good meetings and so forth. And you met every week, part of what they call the in-country team, had to drive 60 miles to Rabat and met with the governor and his staff. Our governor, I mean, not a governor, I'm sorry, ambassador. So you got to hear what his problems were and what was going on, and it was another tremendous education.
No kidding.
So, and after that was back to the States, and I got command of a cruiser, the Richmond K. Turner, and that was a all-missile ship and so forth. And that was, I took command in '77. Came with a lengthy overhaul. They did a tremendous upgrading and so forth. We pulled out the yard, going to Guantanamo for training like you always have to, 6 weeks. We pulled in there on a Friday, and Monday morning we got underway at 6:30, and they put trainers on board, special Navy, all Navy guys, but they're all specialists in bit, and that's how the whole system works. And 11 o'clock that morning, I get a phone call from the base, helicopter en route, take off all trainers, proceed north at max speed, position follows, no speed restrictions. Okay, and a couple of minutes later, message come in, and 4 Russian ships, two cruisers and an oiler and a destroyer were coming in, and they were up by Haiti, and just loitering. And my orders came in to intercept and stay with them. Don't bother them. Just stay with them. Don't leave them. Don't get closer than 2,000 yards. Well, it didn't have to tell me that, but they had it on there. Stay with them. So anyhow, we get up. We got there at about 4 in the morning, and they were barely making headway. And okay, we did the same thing. And then about daylight, they started moving. Bottom line, we escorted them all the way to Havana. And they went into Havana, and that was my job. So I went back to Guantanamo. Got back again on Friday, and Saturday started Liberty, familiar with Liberty, that's the free time when you get off, and started Liberty at noon, and about 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, I get a phone call from the the command control center up in Norfolk. This is the 4-star control office of all of the Atlantic, but on an uncovered phone. Now, I had covered phones, you know, secure phones on the ship, plenty of them, and they did too. I still don't follow it, but in any case, regular telephone, AT&T, and said, how fast can you get underway? Here we go again. I said, it depends where I'm going. Well, I can't tell you. Top off fuel as fast as you can and get underway as fast as you can and head south. No other things. And from then on, it was a really unique experience. As advertised, we needed, half the crew was gone, so I had to get them off the base, got them back on, everyone. Oh, and it said, take on 15 Spanish-speaking radio men. We have a radio station there with nothing but Americans who could speak Spanish. We copy all that stuff. So take 15 of them with you. So we did that. We got underway, and the bottom line, I won't go anymore, but after a whole series of messages, the last one said, be at the entrance of the Panama Canal at 3:30, such and such a morning. All traffic in the canal is cleared. You've got a straight shot going through the canal. And yeah, we did that. Aside a bit on humor again, one of the books, and the weather was perfect. It was summertime, seas were like glass, full of all the plus things. So we were just hopping up from the southern buoy, so you couldn't make a mistake. And you get to the canal. The canal's got big blue lights on each side of the canal. You could see it miles out. But one of the books you deal with, sailing directions, it's called, in bold print, capitalized everything else. Do not turn toward the canal until you have visually sighted buoy such and such, 21 or whatever it was. Clear. We could see it. Couldn't see it. Couldn't hide it. Well, we went a little bit further north, because we were a little ahead of schedule then. I went a little bit further north, a mile or two, couldn't see Quebec. About third time passed, I said, to hell with it. I mean, I don't understand it, but there's the canal. So we pull in, and there's a mini little harbor, the entrance where you pick up the harbor pilot. And because once you get in the canal, I don't have responsibility, but until the bow of the ship gets in there, I get court-martialed if we get something. But anyhow, pilot comes aboard. I said, where in the hell is that buoy that you're never supposed to? Oh, we took that out last year. We just haven't put it back yet. Oh, that was it. So we went through the canal, and on the other side, we were met by a very large van about the size of a semi-truck trailer, and it was 100% communications, and the cause turned out to be why we're there. Somoza, I think it was. General Somoza was going down a tube in Nicaragua. And all of our inland communication capability had been wiped out. He was losing, and he was a dictator, but we were still supporting him in that bit. And the Sandinistas were coming in, and of course, American press said no, they weren't. There was none down. Time magazine had a bit of article. They were not down there, and we with that box had every conceivable that trailer had every conceivable type of convicts you could imagine. If anybody sneezed in Nicaragua, we could say Gesundheit. I mean, it was a And our orders were, we would not get fuel support. We didn't know how long to be there. Operate at maximum speed of 4 knots with only one propeller, and stay, again, 10 miles out and just go up and down slowly. And we'll call you when we need you type thing. And that, one of some of my, I'll be very frank, I'm not happy with American press, the way they cover, how they selectively cover things. And my ship made Time magazine with a picture of it, small, but in that bit of page, gunboat diplomacy returns to the Caribbean. And I guess you could make, but I didn't look at it that way. And then they had a picture of allegedly a supposed a cop or an army guy, something, holding a gun and a corpse in the street. And it was giving, he had ordered shooting anybody, civilian, I mean, anybody that was even remotely thought to be a Somoza. Well, we happened to monitor, copy the voice when the order went out. And the order was specifically, do not do that. But, you know, it's several, I've got a number of examples that you gotta, I don't disagree with them, but I have the right to challenge what I read in the paper. And then make up your mind. So we were there 3 weeks, and we didn't have, I didn't have any guns on the ship. I had, when I went to the shipyard, it had one 5-inch gun. I was 100% missile. I carried 80 missiles. We could shoot 80,000 feet in the air for aircraft and so forth. But if a Satchel came back in a rowboat, we had nothing. So I went to the Army in the Canal Zone and said, I'd like to have 4 50 calibers. And yeah, no question. And I got that from the Army. We welded them to each side of the ship and one up front, and had basically chicken wire wiring it up to the bridge so I could control it. And then I had some former Marines that had been in Vietnam, so they could handle 50s. So we had that, and they, that was another little bit unique. And and before pulling out, the 4-star, when I got there, the 4-star had, we had all kinds of communications, but he wrote a legal paper, 2-page in hand, what he didn't want. And if you ever want to look up something, check about an incident in our history of 1963 on the USS Liberty. Have you ever heard about it? I wouldn't be surprised. It happens to be the most decorated American ship in naval history. The skipper got Congressional Medal of Honor. We lost 37 sailors were killed, 137 wounded, and Israel didn't know it was our ship. With an American flag on it, holiday side, broad daylight. I've got a movie on that whole series there. I just happened to get it. I'm pretty active in a program, and Congress would not allow a congressional investigation. The only military Navy unit that's ever been attacked that didn't get a congressional investigation. Why? And they're still trying to get one. But anyhow, here this 4-star happened to be the officer convened to do the Navy investigation for that incident, the Liberty. And I had forgotten about that, but when I get his handwritten note, and he ended up, I don't want another damn Liberty. And what I didn't keep that. I mean, written in his hand, but I never thought about it. But in any case, we had, I took 4x8 sheets of aluminum, and the kids painted American flags on them, and they put them all the way around the superstructure at the house pilot of the ship. We had, at night, we had the floodlights on the flag, and plus the real flag and so forth. So they couldn't say whatever. So, and the ship came out after we got back with a Navy unit commendation, and I picked a little bit of stuff for that. Again, American Navy units doing foreign policy, international work that is unique to the Navy. It's just normal. It's nothing out of the ordinary. And from there I went on to was sent back to Washington and was the deputy commander for Navy communications, long lines in Washington. And I picked up the admiral's pick on that one, and ended up two more assignments in Washington, again in communications, different types and so forth. So that's just about it, and ended up Well, I retired in '87, so that's,
One question I had, when you first enlisted,
yeah,
flew back, whatever,
yeah.
usually, you know, I mean, you think of parents seeing the person off or whatever, but I mean, that would have happened then for you back in,
Oh,
were you in DC at the
yes,
time?
yeah, and my parents had migrated too, so everybody,
Right,
yeah,
so
yeah,
everybody was out
yeah,
there,
that's
so
right.
they
So,
in essence
my
been-
brother Don that you've met was still back here. He was the last one to migrate.
Okay, yeah.
And he came out in '58 and then came back last fall.
Okay.
So it was one after the other type thing, okay.
Well, very interesting, wow.
Put you to sleep.
No, what a career, I just have to say, what an amazing career. I mean, what an amazing life experience to have been there at those strategic times and places and have met the people that you did and such. I mean,
Well, in any military, you have no idea what you're getting, what you're going to be involved in.
Yeah.
You do what you're told and get out with it.
well, and you've really enlightened me as to, I mean, as a background element, of course, realized that, you know, often the Navy would be deployed as either a deterrent or a persuasion or you know, a presence making known type thing. But boy, you've really fleshed that out for us. So thank you.
And it was, yeah, couldn't have been any better. The family has obviously my son went to 3 high schools in 4 years and 2 universities in 4 years, but that was his choosing. He took 2 years in Germany when we were over there and then finished up in Missouri, and the daughter was same thing, 3 high schools.
That can add to a life experience properly handled.
Well, they claim they learn more that way, but sometimes I got to wonder, because especially with the boys, you can't get in athletics. I mean, when you've got to be in there basically from the 8th grade to get started right, and so forth and so on. And that just never happened. So that was part of it. So okay.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay. Oh,
Oops. And thank you for your service to your country.